You ready?
Okay. Welcome to the Fontlab webinar series, and today we have an interview with Matthew Carter. And I know Matthew doesn't want me to brag on him too much, but he is a valuable resource in the world of typography today. It's just about he's done it all and been there and done that and rubbed shoulders with many of the movers and shakers in the world of typography. So he is very qualified to answer anything we can throw at him. And then I'm Jimmy, the FontMeister. I'm the guy you usually get when you contact Fontlab for tech support. 99% of the time you're going to get me. I was with Adobe and Macromedia for 12 years. I was the senior tech for Macromedia Fontographer, and been doing this since 1984. So I also can say that if there's a font question out there that I haven't been asked, I don't know what it is. So we ought to be able to field some of these questions. I do want to say, for those of you that are, I know we have two colleges of graphics, art, and design that are going to be in on this webinar. I just want to say something. You know, tech support guys are just supposed to be, the customer's always right, and just answer the question. We don't want your opinion. But, you know, tech support guys have an opinion, too. And I would like to say that back in the good old days, if you wanted to become a blacksmith, you had to go work with a blacksmith and be a journeyman or an apprentice. And then later, someday, if you paid attention, you could get to be a blacksmith. And that's how I regard the world of typography, is you cannot just buy a product like Fontlab or Fontographer and say, as many emails and phone calls I get, is how come this thing doesn't automatically make fonts? You've really got to pay your dues to be good at anything. And so to me, you've made a very wise choice by joining this webinar, because you get a chance to work with somebody who can mentor you. And in the world that I've lived in, it's usually loaded with hotshots who are like, hey, suffer. The little peasants can learn the hard way like I did, and that's their problem. But not so with Matthew Carter. He is the quintessential gentleman and is extremely happy to help people who are trying to break into the font business. And just to show you a typical example is, one day I'm walking down the street in Seattle at one of the type festivals, and he walks up to me and says he just wants to thank me for 20-something years of tech support. And I'm wow. I've been doing tech support a long time, and very few people have ever said thank you. So of all people to walk up and say thank you, I didn't even know you realized who I was. So that's just the way Matthew is. So I'm very proud to be associated with him, and as we say, we all stand on each other's shoulders. I do want to let you know, first of all, I want to apologize. There have been some complaints that you get so many emails from any meeting saying, don't forget the webinar, don't forget the webinar, don't forget the webinar. All I can do is apologize, and I'm going to get with their tech support and ask them how could we turn that off, and try to keep from reminding you so much. And all I can do is ask you to forgive us. I also want to give you a quick reminder that next month we will be having a webinar with John Downer on brush Romans. We will actually see how the Trajan font is the great-grandfather of many of the fonts we use, and we're going to break down stem by stem, terminator by terminator. We're going to break down the Trajan font for you, and John Downer and his friend Paul Herrera, who is a disciple of Father Kadish, are going to do an excellent job of showing how we got the Roman alphabet. Then in April, we will have Adam Twardok with Fontlab doing a color font webinar. And then in May, we hope to have Monica Bartels back for advanced hinting techniques. So that gives you a little preview of what's coming down the pike, and I'm going to go ahead and start with the first question, which I believe we've rehearsed this question, so we should be pretty good to go on this one. So Matthew, unless you wanted to say hello and God bless you or something, do you want to just start with the first question?
Sure. I'm ready.
Okay. Well, rather than the patriarchal blessing, which we know is there in your heart, we'll just start out with the first question. Let's just make it easy. What is your favorite typeface that you've designed?
What an unusual question. My usual answer to that question is my favorite typeface is the next one I'm working on. But I happen to be in a sort of lull at the moment. Most of my work at the moment is adding to existing faces, character sets, or new members of the family, and so on. So I can't really give that answer at the moment. I think the other thing to be said about that particular question is that, you know, I'm not a user of type. I don't have to choose between typefaces for a certain job. I'm at the raw material end. I make the things and put them out there, and someone else uses them. So I don't have favorites in the sense that there are particular typefaces that either of mine or anyone else's that I really feel comfortable using. I think for me, when I think of favorite typefaces of my own design, I really think of the circumstances in which they came about. Some of them have had very, very pleasant associations because I've enjoyed working for a particular client and so on. I mean, one that comes immediately to mind was the job I did for the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis back in the 90s. There, you know, working with the people at the Walker, just wonderful. I mean, they were such good guys, and the project went very well, and the typeface I designed for their identity they used very well. So the whole experience from start to finish was a really, really good one. I wish there were more clients like the Walker Art Center in those days. And then, you know, I have to say, people don't really think of Microsoft as being a sort of design-conscious company, at least not compared to Apple. But my whole relationship with them has been very, very pleasant and fruitful. Including, you know, the screen fonts back in the 90s, Verdana and Georgia and so on, and more recently the whole Sitka experience. I have always enjoyed working with engineers very much. Designers are not supposed to like to work with engineers. We're supposed to be suspicious of engineers. But I've always enjoyed working with them very much. So, you know, those technically related jobs like the Microsoft projects and so on have been really, really favorite ones of mine. So I can't come up with a single favorite design. But as I say, I tend to be influenced by the circumstances, the people, the clients, and so on, much more than I can be kind of objective and say, oh, this is my favorite design, or I hate this one, and so on.
Okay. Well, what about one that was your least favorite?
Well, I've been racking my brains to try and think of one that I really kind of regret, you know, with hindsight. I think, you know, I think many designers I've spoken to sort of share this reaction. Sometimes during the development of a typeface, in its early stages, it doesn't go right. You know, you look at early proofs and you feel suicidal. You know, it's not what you thought it was going to be. So I've had typefaces that I have not liked, and I've been working on them. But then what you do is fix them. I mean, I suppose you could throw them away, but I tend to persevere with them. So some of my faces have been through what I call a very unpromising phase, but in the end they've come right. And as I say, I don't really have a project that I think of and think, oh God, I wish I hadn't done that, you know, or I wish it had turned out completely differently. I can look at some of my faces and say, if I was doing that again, I might change something in some small respect, but I don't really have a lot of, perhaps I should, but I don't really have a lot of regrets of that kind. So I sound as though I'm dodging the question, but it's really true that I don't have out and out favorites, and I don't have out and out hates among my faces or anyone else's, really, come to that.
So would you say, I guess this would be a question that I would have liked to have asked, would you say that your work has been primarily utilitarian to get a job done, or do you have a particular project that it was for the beauty of it, that you had a beautiful aesthetic design that you wanted to just to express yourself and get it out there, or do you try to combine the two? Or I guess if I were a font designer 24 hours a day, I would be thinking artistically, like I've got this beautiful idea and I want to express myself and get it out there and I hope everybody loves it. Where do you fit into that?
I think most typefaces are a bit of each. I mean, type has this quality of, it's functional. You have to be able to read it for the most part. But it also has what a friend of mine called the aesthetic surplus. There is, after all, something that makes one typeface different from another, or there's something that makes a particular type designer's work recognizable as their style. And that is really an aesthetic property, I think, or design property. I don't know quite what the right term is. So sometimes projects of mine have started in a very technically oriented way. Bell Centennial for the phone books, Verdana and Georgia for coarse resolution screens and so on. But when you're working on something like that, Verdana and Georgia are good cases in point, I think you do try to give them some visual interest. If they are totally generic, people aren't going to want to use them. There is no such thing really as a totally functional problem-solving typeface. They are, as I say, some sort of mixture of both. But it's equally true, as you suggested, Jim, that sometimes I have started from the aesthetic end, if you like. An example of that is the titling face called Mantegna, which was the direct result of my going to an exhibition of paintings by Mantegna and being very inspired by the lettering in the paintings. There was no technical aspect. It's made as perfectly ordinary PostScript Type 1 font, since probably reformatted to OpenType and so on, but there was no technical problem I was trying to solve in that. I was sort of expressing my admiration for an artist's lettering style and wanting to make something that was really a homage to Mantegna. So you can start from either end, but I think, we type designers, like all industrial designers really, have certain constraints, and ours is the fact that the alphabet that was frozen in its form, the Latin alphabet frozen in its form, since long before there was any typographic version of it. We are stuck with the letterforms. So that is the sort of technical constraint that we can't get away from, however much we want to. If we want to get away from that technical constraint, we probably don't become type designers, because it's a temperamental issue that you need to be working with both the technical aspect and the aesthetic aspect and so on. Some designers, I guess, go more in one direction than the other, but I think usually you can find a sort of happy medium.
Okay, and I forgot to remind everybody, my name is not Ted Harrison. I don't have my own login for any meeting, so I'm Jimmy, the FontMeister. I think it was Joe Tracy asked, do you have a particular typeface that you feel that was the most innovative and successful, and was there a particular glyph or letter form that was your favorite? Like, if I would have designed the Swash R in Caslon, I want to tell you, I would have been so proud of it. Do you have any feelings like that towards a letter form, or what typeface you feel was the most innovative or successful?
Well, this is rather similar to the first question. I don't really rate my typefaces as being overall more or less innovative and so on. You can look at different typefaces I've designed and see aspects of them that for their time might have been innovative. Snell Roundhand, the script face that I did in what was in 1966, early days of photo composition, that had a joining system with overlapping strokes that I don't know if I was actually the first person to do that. I may have been the first or second, but for its time, that was an innovation. It was something that, of course, would have been impossible in the previous method technology. You could not have joining script faces on the liner type machine, the hot metal machine. You could with the liner film. Mantinea, which I mentioned, I shoehorned into the Mantinea font a number of two-letter ligatures. It's a cap only, so it's a titling face. Those normally are part of inscriptional lettering. They're epigraphic, not typographic, but I liked those. They're fun, they're playful. So I did put some of them in Mantinea, and since then there have been a lot of ligatures showing up in fonts. I don't claim to be totally responsible for that innovation, but for the time, 92 or 93, whenever Mantinea came out, there weren't very many two-letter ligatures in typefaces. So, yeah, you can scrounge around and find things that, for the time that they were done, might be innovative. I mean, the Walker typeface, and the way it used these snap-on serifs and so on, was also very original, I would say. But I'm sorry, it sounds like a cop-out, but I don't really have one that stands out in my mind as being sort of super innovative. And as for the letters, no, I rather consciously try and avoid falling in love with any one particular. This is going to get into a slightly different question, which someone else put. Someone asked, which letter do I start with? And I get asked this quite a lot. It's obviously something that interests people. If you are learning about type, if you're in school studying typography and so on, it's very useful to remember certain telltale letters in typefaces. Sometimes the cap Q has a particular form of tail, which is very significant, very characteristic of that typeface. Sometimes the lowercase g has a form that's easy to remember. If you see a lowercase g and there's a gap in the lower bowl, it's probably Baskerville, hello Baskerville. So it's helpful to recognize typefaces by those conspicuous letters. But those are really the last ones that I would ever work on in designing a typeface. If I'm starting out with a sort of regular typeface that has caps, lowercase, and figures in the normal way, I would start with the lowercase, and I would start with the letters that embody the most information that will be useful in designing other letters. In other words, most DNA. And usually for me, that is lowercase h, lowercase o, lowercase p. It's a pity we haven't got, a blackboard for me to write on here. But, a lowercase h gives you an awful lot of information. What is the ascender height? What's the proportion of the lowercase? Does it have serifs or not? What's the fit-pin relationship? Then if you go to an O, you've got some curves. The H is sort of straight-sided. The O is curved. P is half of one and half of the other, so it checks out your decisions, and it's got a descender. So by the time you've done those three letters even, you've got a huge amount of information that you can extrapolate and apply to other letters. And so that's the way I work. I work on a small subset of the lowercase first before getting to the caps or figures. And I work in that way. I mean, I probably would go back and revise HOP many times before I was really satisfied that they were working right. Sometimes when I'm teaching, a student will bring me a lowercase h on a single piece of 8.5 by 11 paper and say, "Is this a good H?" And I'll say, "I have no idea. No idea." And they'll look at me and say, "How come? You should know. You're teaching it." And I will say, "It's only good or bad as it relates to other letters in the lowercase. Go away, please, and do me an O, do me a P, some other letters you like to work with, and put them together. And at that point, I can tell you whether the O is right in its relationship with the H or the P and so on. And we can discuss that, and we can set some control strings and so on." So these kind of very visible letters like cap Q and lowercase g and other, you mentioned a swatch R or something or other. I wouldn't do those until the very end. I would probably enjoy doing them when I got to them, but I wouldn't regard those as fundamental to the character of the typeface. So I would postpone those. And as I say, I try not to get seduced by letters like that too early on, because they might be misleading and so on. You know, that's my answer. That's my answer to two different questions.
That's a good answer. Because, see, in tech support, I can't be too philosophical. I have to give a cut and dried answer, and so I like the balance there. Your system kind of reminds me of Roger Black, very similar system, which kind of brings me to the next question. Can you tell us somebody, some human being who you think was one of the most major influences on your work?
That's again, that's a tough question. You know, this is a sad period for me and a lot of others in this business, because 2 nights ago, Mike Parker died. I'd known Mike for, 50 years or 55 years or something rather. And we worked together for at least 20, if not 25 years. Mike was my boss at Linotype and at Bitstream, and also my editor, really. And those of you who knew Mike will recognize when I say that his great strength was enthusiasm. I mean, I never met anyone who had the sort of unstoppable enthusiasm for typography that Mike had. And you're very lucky if you're like me and you can work with an editor, as Mike was for me, who has that amazing enthusiasm. It kind of carries you along, you know. So I've been thinking a lot about Mike the last couple of days for obvious sad reasons, but sad or not, I feel I do owe him a great deal, and he did influence me. Not in the sense that I make an A because Mike told me to make an A like that. We didn't have that kind of relationship. In fact, I've never had that relationship with another designer. I don't, except I suppose I should say historically, because, you know, a number of my faces are to some degree historically based, some more so than others, but you know, if I'm working on Galliard, I'm influenced by Robert Grandjean. If I'm working on Miller, which is a Scotch Roman, I'm influenced by Richard Austin. If I'm, and so on, you know, if I'm working on Big Caslin, I'm influenced by William Caslin. But I suppose I should also mention Adrian Frutiger. Again, I don't aspire to draw letters like Adrian's. Perhaps I should do, but when I was in close contact with Adrian in the 60s, I had a job in London that took me a week out of every month to Paris, and got to know Adrian well. I think at that time in my life, I had a sort of complex, because I'd started out learning how to make type. You know, I did so by hand, by obsolete means, really. But I thought of myself more as a sort of type maker than a type designer. In fact, I thought that because I started out making type, perhaps I never could be a designer. I thought, you know, designers work on a sort of loftier plane. They design something, clap hands, and send for someone to produce whatever it was they designed. So maybe I was fated to spend a life executing the work of other designers. But then when I met Adrian, I found that he was, first of all, a designer of absolute genius. And secondly, he was very technically adept. I mean, he could make things supremely well. In fact, if I ever wanted to know the answer to a technical question as it concerned the machines we were working with then, I didn't go to the engineers. I went to Adrian, because not only did Adrian know the answer, but he knew why I was asking the question. And so I had a very good rapport with him in that sense. And that sort of cured me of this complex, because I realized, yes, you could be someone who understood the making aspect of all of this, but also was not disqualified from being a designer. In fact, in some ways, it might help you. You know, there are some very good architects who started out as builders laying bricks. Doesn't disqualify you from being a great architect. And I would say that Adrian was a great influence on me in terms of attitude and temperament and so on.
Yes. 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 Great answer. Only had one contact with him for tech support, but Mr. Frutiger was just the ultimate great guy. I get asked this question quite often. What makes a typeface original? If my typeface looks very similar to another typeface, is that going to be a problem, and why?
Well, what a question. It can be a problem. You know, we're living after whatever it is, 500 and whatever it is years since the invention of movable type, and there's been an awful lot of type designers in that period of time. As Fred Gowdy said, the old guys have stolen all of our best ideas. So we are slicing the pie thinner and thinner. You know, there are a lot of typefaces, particularly in my case, sans serifs out there, doing extremely well in the market, and I can't tell one from the other. That's more my fault than theirs, probably, but if, you know, it's happened to me and it's happened to colleagues of mine that I've started out on a project, and at a certain point I've stood back and I thought, whoops, this is starting to look an awful lot like such and such a typeface. And I've been to the designer of that typeface and I've said, you know, judging by the way this is shaping up, I may be getting rather close to your so-and-so design. Is that a problem? And if so, what should I do about it? And it's never happened that somebody has said, stop it, you know, you are infringing on my idea. Go away and do something else. And I've had people come to me with the same question. They've said, you know, I'm working on this design and it's starting to remind me an awful lot of such and such a typeface of yours, Matthew. Is this a problem? And we discussed that, and it's never been a problem. Sometimes, you know, we can see ways in which the typeface can be changed to its advantage that will take it a little bit further away. If you're not prepared to do that, if you find yourself hovering near someone else's type design, then it's a slightly different situation. And I suppose you do risk being in conflict with someone else's idea. The law, as you may know in this country, is ambiguous on this score, and you might not get into any kind of legal trouble, but you might find yourself a bit of an outcast in the typographic community. So it's not maybe that's not a very satisfactory answer, but and there may be people other than myself who are more militant about this. And if they see a type design out there that they think has reused an idea of theirs, they go after the person, you know. But that does happen to me. I see typefaces out there, and I sort of recognize, oh, I guess he was looking at such and such a face of mine, at least as a starting point. But if anything, I'm rather flattered by that. I mean, I like the idea that something that I put out there at an earlier time is picked out by someone who sees something in it that they can use, they can adapt, they can modify, they can take further maybe and do better. They're standing on my shoulders, as you were saying. So this is in my working life, this question, which is a very good one, has not been a problem for me, either from things I've been doing or things that people have been doing to me. It's always been resolved very well. And that's the only recommendation that I can give, to be frank about it and find a way around it.
Okay. That's a fair answer. We've got to cover this question since we have some of these design colleges listening in. What is the most important piece of advice you can give to a new novice type designer who wants to get into a serious type design career?
I think it's a good time. I think it's a good time to be a type designer, whether you are starting out or what is it called? Designers first starting, entry-level designers, and what Ed Feller calls him and me, we are exit-level designers. I think it's a good time for both of us. If you are, well, this is a generalization, and there are obviously conspicuous exceptions to this, but I've always thought, both historically and in contemporary times, most type designers are essentially self-taught. That doesn't mean they didn't go to art school. It doesn't mean they didn't work alongside someone and learn from them. But I think most type designers, if you're going to do it, you probably are self-motivated and self-driven. So by all means, sign on for classes at Type Cooper in New York, or go to Reading or go to The Hague and so on. But I think in the end, what is going to push you is really your own motivation. I think that, it's a good time to be starting out because there are so many ways of getting your work out there. When I was starting out, it was, sort of an unknown profession, first of all, but, to get something accepted by monotype or linotype, which were essentially the only games in town, I mean, there were still some type foundries, I admit, that was a very difficult process. I mean, how you ever got, you couldn't just walk into monotype with a type design and say, hey, make this, publish this. It was a huge industrial process to design and produce a new typeface. Nowadays, thanks to the technology, everything is much more accessible. It's become democratized, and a very good thing too, in my opinion. So, there are companies out there who publish fonts that come in from the outside. A number of designers have started their own website to sell their own work. Probably hard to make a living doing that when you're first starting out, although there are some people who succeeded in doing that with amazing speed. So there are a number of options. But again, I think really the advice I give to students when they tell me that they kind of feel a desire to get into type design is it's going to be up to you pretty much. You'll find people will help you, of course. There'll be very willing people to crit your work and so on. But in the end, you've got to do the work. You've got to motivate yourself here. So that's the easiest and best advice I can give someone starting out.
Okay. I guess, would there be any books you might recommend, or a way of studying somebody's typefaces? If you were a complete newbie to try to saturate yourself in this world, how do you step into this world other than buying Fontlab and playing around with it? Where would you start?
That may be the best way to do it. I mean, obviously, I tend to be interested in the history of typography. Not everyone is. Several people in the past have come to type design from related disciplines. It used to be much easier to learn calligraphy or even stone cutting of inscriptions than it was to get into type design. Now I think that has flipped. It's a lot easier to find a computer with Fontlab on it than it is to learn to cut a quill pen or to learn how to whack a chisel into a piece of marble. But people do come to that as they come to the history in the sort of reverse order. They fool around with Fontlab, if you like. Then they get interested in the history and they go and study that. Any exposure to letterforms is good. Whether you are drawing them in a sketchbook, whether you are looking at them as you walk down the street, whether you are browsing the web and looking at things, whether you are opening existing fonts in Fontlab, seeing how they're put together, That's a very valuable exercise. There are many, many ways to familiarize yourself with the whole field. And I don't know that one is better than the other. I mean, I myself do not any longer make pencil sketches on paper. But if Eric Spiekermann heard me say that, he'd hit me because he swears by that. I mean, Eric always starts with sketches on paper. A number of other type designers do. Sarah Typesmith, I know, does. But there are other type designers, and one of them who don't do that. Susanna Litchko doesn't make sketches, as far as I know. Joe Una doesn't. I work directly on the screen. So again, there isn't a right or wrong way of doing this. It's whatever way suits you. If you are interested in history, you find some nice type specimen, you scan it, you put it in the background plane of Fontlab, and you digitize over it. That is a fabulous way of learning how letterforms go. But I wouldn't say that's the only way to do it. If you prefer to make sketches, either on paper or in Illustrator or something or other, scan those or import them, that's also fine. I mean, do whatever you like. If you're a gifted calligrapher like Sumner Stone, sit down with a pen and make beautiful letters and scan them in, you know. There isn't any one optimum way, in my experience, or anyone else's really, of getting into this. So I can't pontificate about that and say all aspiring type designers will go and spend a semester doing Edward Johnston stuff, broad pen lettering and so on.
Yeah.
Fine, if that turns them on, if they like that, good. You know, all straight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I did want to clarify because I have to keep my volume down because every time I turn it up to hear you, then people say my microphone's too loud. So, but if I could clarify, did you say you start out on paper or do you start out on the screen?
On the screen. I can't draw very well. I make mistakes on the screen and I clean them up on the screen. Okay.
Great. Okay. Now, here's an important question. Looking back at Verdana, what would you do differently if you were to do it over again? And how did Verdana influence the fonts you created later on?
Well, Verdana and Georgia too, come to that, were designed at a very specific point in time, mid-90s. I think I started talking to Microsoft about screen fonts in maybe 93 or 94. And Microsoft had correctly foreseen that the world was going to stampede towards the screen. In other words, more and more people were going to be communicating electronically, and printing out on paper was going to become less important. Up to that point, of course, all screen fonts were adapted from pre-existing printing fonts. They had to be, with various degrees of success. But Microsoft had the idea that rather than adapting existing fonts, we should sort of bite the bullet and design a font that was primarily for the screen. And that is exactly what we did. We did it by doing the screen bitmaps first. You know, obviously what appears on the screen is a bitmap, not an outline version. The outline is rasterized, displayed on the screen. And in those days, the mid-90s, screens were binary. I mean, a pixel on the screen was either on or it was off. There was no grayscale yet, no photometric resolution enhancements, and so on. So it was kind of crude work. And I had to be very diligent in designing these bitmaps, pixel by pixel, and then running them by the folks at Microsoft and saying, you know, is this too heavy, too light, too big, too small, and so on. It's very easy to hack bitmap fonts, so we could do a lot of them and evaluate them and so on. And this gets back to this theme that fascinates me so much, which is the difference between a constraint and a compromise. You know, Charles Eames, great furniture industrial designer, said somewhere that he was very conscious of having to work within constraints, like any industrial designer, but he was not conscious of working within compromises and making compromises. So when I was working on Verdana for coarse resolution screen binary bitmaps, I was certainly working within constraints, my God, but was I making compromises? And to me, I really was not, because I was not working to a lower standard. I was working to the highest standard that the technology allowed at the time.
Yeah.
By bitmaps. So if I was to redo Verdana, if Microsoft came to me now and said, we want a sans serif for the screen and a serif font for the screen, I would probably say, well, how will those be different from printing fonts? I mean, the photometric resolution of screens has increased. The spatial resolution of screens has increased. Why would you need a specific screen font? And they might well say, well, actually, we don't. One size fits all, so to say. So, this has been a recurrent question for me. A number of typefaces, going back well before Verdana and Georgia, were designed within constraints. I mean, think of the 18-unit spacing system for the liner film in those early machines. That was heavy going to make a typeface fit the 18-unit system. I mean, instead of 18 units, we have 1,000 units now, or 2,048 if you work for Microsoft. So those constraints have always been around, I think, in my work, and I've always embraced them. I mean, in some ways, constraints are liberating. They can sort of shake you out of easy answers and old habits, make you look at something freshly because you can't do it the way you might have wanted to do so. So it's a really tough question to answer if I would change anything about Verdana. I mean, there is now a Verdana Pro and a Georgia Pro, and one of the things that was done for the new series was to add a new weight. On the screen in the mid-90s, the only way you could go from regular to bold was to double the stem weight, which is a big jump in typographic terms. So they sort of inserted a semi-bold or something like that, which is a very good thing to have. So that, yes, increasing the family is some things that I might want to do, just as well done. But when it came to the actual basic letter forms of Verdana and Georgia, I probably wouldn't tinker with them very much today, I think.
Okay. Well, that kind of segues into another question which somebody asked, but I kind of feel like I wish I would have asked this as well. Many times over the years when I've had a font problem, I've contacted David Lemon at Adobe, and he has said, well, Jimmy, what size, point size, is the final project supposed to be? Okay, well, I guess it's going to be body text at 10 point. And he said, well, then why don't you just design the 10 point and get it perfect and then worry about everything else later? So I'm kind of now starting to question that. But is that the way you've traditionally looked at it? Is, first of all, what is the intended use at what size, and that's where you start? Or, how do you think that's changing now, or will that always be that way?
Generally speaking, I think I have started with a kind of target size or range of sizes in mind. I call Big Caslin Big Caslin because if you use it at small sizes, it simply falls apart, So yes, I generally do have an idea of what size it's aimed at. I'm not always right, mind you, that things get used at unpredictable sizes. This project I did recently with Microsoft called the Sitka, that had at the heart of it from the start, it took a long, we worked on it for something like 6 years, But that had the idea from the start to do what is called optical scaling. In other words, to optimize the design for a wide range of different sizes, starting all the way down at 6 point and going all the way up to, I don't know what we consider the larger size, 36 at least, or even bigger. And we did this in the way that was traditionally done by the type founders and by monotype and linotype, by making different master sizes for each range as we went, not for every size, but for every size range. And it was surprising as we worked on this how much they changed as a function of output size. They are, I hope, recognizably the same typeface, whatever size you look at it at, set it at. But there are many differences of the kind that you would expect. Overall weight, contrast, consistency, X height, spacing, and so on. Some of the old linotype size ranges, I think, are wonderful to look at. There's a face that never got much use called Primer, designed by Rudolf Sitka. Never got much use because it never had a boldface done for it and so on. But if you look at a specimen of Primer, the different sizes, set on the same page, there is a wonderful consistency of the color of these different sizes of type across the page. It's really beautifully orchestrated, again, by the designers at Linotype, who adapt Sitka's design for different sizes. So as to whether it's going out or not, I'm not really sure. You know, there was, Adobe had a thing called multiple masters, which was essentially this idea that you would have size-specific versions of a typeface. But it's sort of fallen out of use, rather like Apple's GX technology way back when had the same ambition, and that's kind of fallen out of use. There is a perception, I think, that selecting typefaces based on their size is a difficult thing to do. You need a PhD, you know, to decide what is the optimum version of a typeface. So maybe it will become automated. Maybe the extension of what we did with Sitka will be a system that simply looks and says, oh, you know, he's setting in 14 point, therefore he gets the 14-point master. What could be easier, you know? And that, I think, would be a good thing. So I can't really predict whether this will be a permanent part of typography. I hope it does, because I think the benefits of optical scaling, size-related types, and so on are genuine and well worth doing, even if you do it rather broad brush, as I did with Miller. You know, I did Miller text and Miller display. By and large, people have used it accordingly, although I sometimes see the display face used for text, which looks too light for me, or I see the text face used display, which looks too heavy. But by and large, people sort of get it and use it right. Yeah. Any more questions? Have I lost you?
We are at the 10-minute warning mark, and okay. I guess I'm going to say I'm going to try to find some scattered questions that I didn't answer here. This one, I didn't know what to do with this other than to go back in my hippie days in the 60s. What do you believe the culture of visuals would be different if Helvetica were not so common? That kind of slaps me upside the face where I'm thinking, so what if some graffiti was the, the lingua franca? Everywhere you looked, there was graffiti on all the street signs and all the buildings, and instead of Helvetica. I don't know what to do with that. What do you think of, what if Helvetica didn't become the predominant typeface? I don't know.
Yeah, life without Helvetica would be interesting. You know, Sarah Highsmith had this project of spending a day without Helvetica, and I think he failed. I mean, you You can't actually get away from Helvetica for a whole day, even if you want to. You can't avoid it. So what our visual culture would be like if there were no Helvetica, it's really hard to say. This comes out in the Helvetica movie, by the way, but a lot of the success, I think, of Helvetica, particularly in this country, in this hemisphere, I would say, has to do with availability. If Helvetica had simply remained a Swiss-designed German manufactured typeface, it would never have had the popularity that it had in this country. And my I mentioned earlier had an enormous amount to do with that. The fact of manufacturing Helvetica as linotype matrices to the American standard and fonts and so on in this country had an awful lot to do with establishing it. I think that had a lot to do with the fact that Helvetica distanced Universe in this part of the world. You know, they both started out in Europe in the same place in the same year. There were parts of Europe where Universe predominated over Helvetica by a long chalk. Not so over here. So had those initiatives taken by Mike and others not existed, and had Helvetica not have had the extraordinary impact it's had in the visual culture here, I can only say that some other typeface probably would have taken its place. Maybe it would have been Universe, maybe it would have been Accidents Grotesque. I simply can't predict. But it is, you know, as far as found, it's pretty hard to get away from. It's hard to imagine an environment in which it didn't exist.
Yes, I would say so. So what if every street sign, every store sign, and every street sign was looked like the side of a railroad car with graffiti? You know, much of which is very beautiful artwork, but we can't read it. So that was a good answer. You know, you'd make a great politician.
I don't think that's a compliment, Jim.
Okay.
I dodge all the questions.
No. I think you did the best you could. I did want to let people know, in case they didn't know, especially the graphic colleges, that there is a movie called the Helvetica movie, and I think it would be very beneficial for those graphic colleges to see that movie. I can't remember where you can get it from, but if you probably go Google it, Helvetica movie, very worthwhile to watch that.
Yeah, you can get it on DVD. It's very easily available. Yeah. Jim, we got a little bit of time left. There was one question that was put to me. I've got it printed out here that I thought was rather interesting. Can I read it out and have a shot at answering it in short order?
Yes, please do. And I was going to say, for anybody who has to leave, you know, we're going to keep the recording going, and Matthew and I are going to hang out for a while after we're in about 5 minutes away from the end. But if you have to go, don't worry about it, because you can watch the recording later. So, yeah, I would appreciate it if you would read that question and give it a shot.
Okay, here's the question. It says, a purist typographer might argue that new technologies have swamped us with a flood of fonts and processes which dilute the meaning and effectiveness of classic typesetting. The current state of the art with video titling, screen presentations, and web page animation repeats the paradigm once set in place with desktop publishing with regards to animated type. Do you foresee the onset of a new dimension in strict typography with animated text as a true enhancement to information architecture, or is performing text, which is in quotes, limited to the role of decorative enhancement? That's a really interesting question, and I've thought about it a good deal. And once again, you know, the politician in me that Jim has identified doesn't really have a hard and fast answer. But I did have an experience at an earlier time that may throw some light on this. You know, I've referred to this moment before, but when metal type gave way to phototype, hot type to cold type, there was a great sort of excitement about losing a dimension. And we went from three-dimensional type you can hold in your hand to a two-dimensional planar image. And there was some exciting prospects there. And what people said was, there's no reason any longer why type has to be set in straight horizontal lines. Because type is no longer little bits of rectangular metal which go together in straight rectangular lines. They can be any way they like. We can have type in wavy lines. We can have type in spirals and circles, going on, whatever you like. Well, this was sort of true, and everyone did it for about a month. But then people woke up to the fact that type is not in straight lines because it was made of little bits of rectangular metal. It was made of little bits of rectangular metal because it goes in straight lines. So everyone reverted back to setting type in straight lines, but occasionally they did do a wavy line, which would have been hell to do in metal, but was relatively easy to do in film. Not easy, I would say, but relatively easy perhaps to do. So I can only guess that the same thing will happen here, that all these kind of whiz-bang things that were listed in this very good question about animation and, video titling and so on, I'm sure they will not disappear completely. I don't think the old order of purist typography will ever reassert itself completely. But I think, that we will continue to have strict typography, if that's the right term for it. But I think these animations and these other things will continue to play a role. And I think good information architecture, good typography, will make very good use of them. And they won't just be a sort of decorative element, as this question puts it very well. That's the best answer I can give to that. And my experience back in the days of photo composition certainly bears that out, that you do gain some benefits, which you do make use of and can find good uses for. Yeah.
Wow. I can't believe you took that question. You did a good job with that. And there are going to be some people who are going to drop out on us here. I wanted to say thank you for attending the webinar, and I want you to be aware that we have a new forum at fontlab.com. You can go into the forums, and you can see all the projected webinars that we intend to do several months down the road. A lot of good stuff there for you. And so we're going to continue on here. Can you hang out with us for a while, Matthew, and we'll kind of shoot from the hip for a while?
Absolutely. By the way, I just wanted to say before people leave, a number of names of friends of mine have cropped up on the left-hand side of my screen here, and I would just like to say hello to them. They know who they are. It's nice to have their company here, and some very nice remarks have come along in the course of this conversation. I haven't been able to concentrate so much on what other people have been saying because I've been trying to answer the questions. But I see some familiar names there, and so hi to them. So yeah, I'm game to press on, Jim, if you have other questions that have come in, or you can think of them. Yeah, I did have. I have a short answer to a question that I have on paper here. It says, what was the inspiration for the name Georgia? This is the Microsoft screen font that I alluded to earlier, done in the mid-90s, serif face. Well, I can tell you the answer, but when you know the answer, it still doesn't make any sense to you. This is what I was told by Microsoft. I mean, Microsoft gave both Verdana and Georgia their names. I did not do that. I was told that someone was standing in the checkout line of a supermarket and picked up one of those kind of supermarket tabloids. And there was a headline that said, "Alien heads have landed in Georgia." And that is the reason that Georgia, the typeface, has the name Georgia. But don't ask me why the landing of alien heads in Georgia would suggest to someone that a typeface should have that name. I have no idea. Maybe they were simply desperate at this point to think of any name for what came Georgia, and seeing this supermarket tabloid headline was good enough. That is the quoted reason for Georgia. There's a little bit more sense to Verdana, because Microsoft are up there in the Northwest. The idea of verdant, of rainy, lush, green vegetation came into it. And then the daughter of Virginia Howlett, who the Microsoft manager, who sort of ramrodded this project in its latest stages, her daughter's name is Anna. So there's a very long tradition of naming typefaces after daughters, or indeed naming daughters after typefaces. And so Verdana is partly, the greenery, and it's partly the very nice daughter of Virginia Howlett. So I continue that. Also, there was one other derivation of Verdana that was done for a condensed version of Verdana for small devices called Nina, and Nina was the name of the mother of the manager of that project. So you can see how much sense all these names made. I have offered a bottle of champagne before now to someone who comes up with a good name for typeface. It's much harder to name typefaces than design them, in my experience. But for what it's worth, that's how Georgia got its name.
Well, and I believe it, because working with the guys in the Microsoft typography department for many years, those guys are crazy, and I think they need to do things like that to keep their sanity sometimes. You can go on Google and find some interesting stories, especially about how Comic Sans came about, and Vinnie Canard will deny anything. But okay, well, we're officially going to call the meeting to a close and then go off into the extracurricular questions. So for those of you who have to leave, thanks for stopping by. And then I think it's time to take the gloves off and start asking some hard questions, because I've surfed the web enough to see that you have had too many softball questions over the years, Matthew. So now I want to ask a few things that I've been dying to ask you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. We could make some of this very brief. I'm wondering if you have been hearing rumors of some of the new vector drawing philosophy to change the way we draw vectors and Bezier curves, that the Type 1 spec will no longer dominate the way we do things, and we will, at some day, we will go in and do things with vectors that you never dreamed about doing. And Fontlab is actually working on some secret projects like that right now, and I wondered how much you'd heard about that, and what do you think of the idea of drawing vectors in a more free-form way, and doing such things as being able to take a part of a stem and link it to another part of the stem, so that when you move this part, it automatically moves the other part, and a lot of wild things are being suggested for the way we draw vectors. Have you heard some of these things?
I have heard of them. I am not using any very advanced tools myself at the moment. I probably should be. I'm pleased to hear that FontLab is worrying about this and working on it, because I think that more enhanced ways of drawing would benefit everyone. I'm rather, I tend to get more concerned with the design aspects than the production aspects of what I do. And I think a lot of these newer tools are very helpful with the production aspects, perhaps less so with the design aspects. The thing you just mentioned, Jim, the idea of grabbing a stem and making it replicate itself in other places, is very similar to the concept behind Metafont, that Don Knuth developed in the 80s. So some of these ideas take a while before they really take root and become accessible. But yes, I've heard these rumors, and I will watch the developments with great interest. Yeah.
Okay. since we've ventured out there into that world, I wanted to go ahead and see if you have heard. I'm kind of going on thin ice here because I didn't have time to look at this. I know Eric von Blockland and some of the guys are working on some very avant-garde things, but somebody had a question here. I think I sent you that Frank Blockland, maybe that's Eric's full name. I've never called him by his full name.
No, that's a different guy.
That's a different guy? Okay. Is working on harmonics, patterns, and dynamics in formal typographic representations of the Latin script. And so it's a different M-square theory. I really would have to look that up because I'm not sure where we're going with that. Did you see that one?
I know Frank Blockland, and I am slightly familiar with his theories. He's either a genius or a complete crackpot, and I can't make up my mind which. He has all sorts of strange ideas about how early punch cutters cut their faces and how they cast them and so on. I honestly, all this is part of his thesis for his dissertation, his PhD. And maybe at the end of the day, when it's all published, I will be able to read it and come to a feel about it. At the moment, I don't really know enough about it to give a qualified opinion of Frank's work.
Okay, well, me neither, and I apologize because I'm supposed to know everything, and then anything I don't know, you're supposed to know. But there's a lot of stuff that's changing very fast right now, such as someday we will be talking about creating your own emoji fonts for your own cell phone and your own with intrinsic color embedded attributes. And so that is a big topic of discussion, and the specs are way up in the air, and all we know now with TransType 4 is to create 3 font files to make Apple and Adobe and Microsoft all happy so that you can follow whichever spec you want. So there's a lot of stuff that's on the table right now.
Yes, it's not so long ago that everyone thought every person on Earth would have their own private font. I remember Roger Black saying, "Fonts the new sushi." Everyone loves them. Everyone will have their own. Never actually happened. A few of us do have our own fonts, and there are services, that will take your handwriting and make you a font out of it and so on. Good luck to them. So some of these ideas about how these new kinds of fonts are going to take over the world really don't come to fruition, at least not fully in my experience. But it is interesting to talk about them. I mean, I would much rather work from the lunatic fringe in than work from the inside out and miss opportunities. So when I hear someone talking about something which at first blush I think sounds far out or even ridiculous, I always try and pay attention and so on, because who knows, they may be onto something. And it would be as well to think about it and bear it in mind. But you are right in the general sense that there's a lot going on, a lot of foment in the type business, both in the design end and particularly, I think, in the technical end. And what this will lead to, I can't say, and frankly, between you and me, nor can anyone else.
Okay. Okay, now listen, there is a question here from Harant Papazian, and he's asking, and forgive me, Mr. Papazian, because you've contacted me many times over the years for tech support, but I've never known how to pronounce your name. It's good to see you on here. He says, many people are basing their fonts closely on what a broad nib pen would produce. Now, that, by the way, I need to interject, is exactly what John Downer will be covering next month in our webinar on the development of Trajan. John Downer is a purist in the fact that you absolutely must take a brush or a pen and apply it to a piece of paper and get the feel and the I don't know how to describe this beautiful kinetic feeling of how you draw each stem and how you lift the pen or the brush off the paper, which causes I'm sorry for my volume, I'm turning it down. As you lift the brush off the paper, it causes this exquisite terminator to occur based on the very technique of how you are holding the brush and the pen. So there are people that swear by that, and John Donner is one of them, and you're going to love it when he does this next month. But now let's see what Matthew Carter thinks of that approach.
Yeah, Grant is asking for an opinion about this. You know, I suppose they still do it. I haven't been there in a number of years, but at Cal Arts, Mr. Keedy teaches a type design class, and everyone has to begin in the first semester with a broad edge pen, doing essentially Edward Johnston foundation hand lettering. They then digitize that at a later stage and sort of take it from there. And obviously, Keedy has found this a very good introductory way of getting into teaching type design. And as I was saying a few minutes ago, there are many different ways of doing this. I have never taken that approach myself, just to be kind of egocentric about this, because I can't make a pen go where I want it to. Great source of frustration when I was a kid. I had Edward Johnston's manual and very much wished to be able to make the same letters with a pen, but I couldn't get the pen to go where I could see it in my mind's eye, but I couldn't get the pen to go right. So I'm a sort of frustrated calligrapher, threw the pen against the wall or something or other because, you know, I couldn't do it. But I'm not against it at all. Typefaces that exactly mimic formal pen lettering have their place in the world. I mean, script types, as several people have discovered, are extremely popular and very profitable if you make good popular ones. And I suppose broad edge pen lettering is one good way into that, but it's only one. You know, in the Yale teaching that I do with Tobias Freer-Jones, it's a graduate school, graduate class, and we don't recommend any one way of getting into it. If somebody said to Tobias or me that they really loved broad pen lettering, could they do some as a way of getting into it? I would be delighted, but I would never force a student to do that. My last thought on this is it's a little bit broader than just broad edge pen, but you know, I've been disappointed sometimes to talk to students who said to me that they wanted to get into type design, but the faculty at their school said that they could not do so unless they were good calligraphers. And that made me sad, because although it's a very fine way to get into type design, look at Herman Zuff, look at Sumner Stone. There are many fine calligraphers who've done wonderful type designs. It is not necessary to do that. I mean, I'm not a calligrapher. Susanna Litchko is not a calligrapher. Jardona is not a calligrapher. There are plenty of us who can't make a pen go where we want to. And it doesn't seem to have stopped us from being type designers. So that's my only beef, as it were, about this whole question of pen lettering, penmanship, as a way, as it relates to type design. If you can do it, good luck to you. It's a wonderful thing to be able to do. But if you can't do it, don't abandon the idea of being a type designer. You can still make perfectly good letters by other means. So that's, you know, that's my thoughts on that whole subject. Yeah.
That's a very good answer. You know, I would say if I were to summarize you today, you would say there is no such thing as one size fits all. That's been consistent in many of your answers.
I think it's true. You know, if a different type designer was sitting here in my place, they probably would have given very different answers to a number of questions that I've been asked. And you know, that's all for the good. There are more type designers now probably than at most periods of history, perhaps all periods of history. But you still can't really generalize about them. I tried to do it once or twice, you know, and I said most type designers are self-taught. I was generalizing, but there isn't really a generality of type designers yet, and perhaps there never will be. So yeah, to say that different people have different approaches, different ways of getting into this, different ways of training themselves, different ways of putting their work out there in front of people. I think that's very true, and I think it's tremendously healthy. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Okay. I'm not sure how long you can hang around, but excuse me. I wanted to ask you what I'm going to be asking the audience is if I could solicit your ideas. These webinars we started in September with hinting and spacing and metrics and kerning and everything you can imagine, and people are loving these webinars. So Matthew, could I just ask you first, do you have some ideas for some topics that if you were, you know, something you might be interested in, or maybe back when you were starting out, what are some suggestions for some webinars we can do that you think would be profitable?
Well, you know, we talked a bit about doing a crit, design crit, having people bring samples of their work and have someone or some people comment on them constructively, I hope, as we do at TypeCon in you know, non-web situation, real life, as it were. And that may have some ideas. My thought about this, Jim, is that I'm very glad that John Downer is doing it, and I may well sign up for that, because John is a guy with not only a great deal of skill and experience, but a strong personality. And it comes across when you are talking to John, even on the telephone and so on. And so I would say that you might do well to look around this field and say, who do you know who has strong opinions? You don't necessarily have to agree with them, has strong opinions, expresses them well, and, you know, would be interesting and instructive for an hour or over an hour in a webinar. And I wouldn't be so much concerned about what the subject was, you know. I would, John Downer has a natural predisposition to talk about the very thing that he's talking about. But, you know, if he wanted to talk about something else, I'd still book him for a webinar because he's an entertaining guy to be in conversation with. And I can think of some guys, I mean, some of them, their names cropped up on the left-hand side of my screen in the course of this, who could very well take my place in this chair and do a better job than I've done. So I would sort of go for personalities or characters who you think would be interesting and instructive, rather than necessarily saying, we've got to hear about harmonics in the spacing of incunabular type or something like that, you know. So, yeah, you know, Frank is just suggesting Jerry's leader on non-Latin type. Great idea. Jerry's very, you know, he's a superb educator. He's very used to talking to students and everyone else, and he's a great guy, and he's got a lot of knowledge and experience. He would be super.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great suggestions. Now, you do know that in my position, I can't afford to be as philosophical as you because, for one thing, I got to cover certain topics. I have to cover spacing, kerning, open type features, hinting, blah, 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 blah. I can't just always have Matthew Carter, you know, philosophizing, so I don't have that luxury. So we're trying to strike a balance here. Now, something I wanted to say that I like the way you said the idea of that somebody else might start with a pen or a brush, or they might do this or they might do that. But what do you know? The font they're creating is finished and it works and it's beautiful, and we're not worrying about how, oh my God, they started with a brush and Matthew didn't. And so I think that's very freeing. It should be for a lot of students, that there isn't just one way to do it. That if you really apply yourself and absorb yourself in it, you're going to get there, and maybe you got there a different way than Matthew or John Downer would, but you're going to get there.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. I tried to make that myself, and I think it's worth repeating. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're winding down here. I'm writing down some of these suggestions as fast as I can, but I'm wanting to make sure we cover a couple things here. Is it Joe Tracy said, will there ever be any more typeface classifications? In other words, is the Panos table or the Panos book a closed book?
Tell Joe to shut up.
Tell Joe to shut up. All right. I'm sure he'll take that as an honor. He'll tell his wife, hey, honey, Matthew Carter told me to shut up.
You know, Joe's probably bugged me about this before, and he's doing it to be mischievous. But I'm not an expert.
Very true.
Yeah. But, you know, if Joe wants more classifications, he should have them.
Okay, that was a good answer. I swear you should have been a politician. You know, we can't nail you on anything today. Now, there was somebody else had one. I'm afraid I might have skipped the question. Oh, this is the one here. Nicholas, I'm not really sure I understood the question. I think we saw this one before and we didn't get to it, Matthew. What do you think about Ikea changing their typeface from Futura to Verdana? Do you remember that one?
I can't forget this question. I get, you know, wherever I give a talk, a lecture, whatever it's about, someone gets up at the end and asks a question about the Ikea catalog. It will not go away. And I have, because I've had to answer this question 50 times, I had a certain amount of experience. I had nothing whatever to do with this. I have never had any contact with Ikea either before or since they made this change. And I think I'm the only person on the planet who didn't used to get the Ikea catalog. So when I started reading stories about the scandal of changing from Futura to Verdana, right, reading it online, reading it in the New York Times, Atlantic magazine, all over the place, I was like, God, I better get hold of a copy. And it sounds absolutely dreadful. You know, what are these poor people suffering from? So I did get a copy of the old version with Futura and the new version with Verdana, and I really couldn't see what the fuss was. It seemed to me that whoever was designing the catalog at Ikea was doing a very good job of using both typefaces that come to that. But I do know from many experiences living through redesigns of newspapers and magazines that people do get attached, emotionally invested in certain typefaces. And they don't like it when there's a change, for whatever reason. And so I sympathize with that. You know, I've never heard all of the reasons why IKEA chose to make that change. I believe it had something to do with economics and also the fact that Verdana by now comes with all kinds of non-Latin versions, and IKEA, as you know, is an international company. But whatever the reason, I didn't think that typographically there was a case for, all the petitions that people got together to get IKEA to revert back to Futura. But from the sort of emotional point of view, I could understand some of that. What tends to happen, there was some time ago, I'll just tell this little anecdote. The New York Times, they didn't exactly redesign, but they sort of rationalized the use of the headline faces in their paper. And Michael Bird, enormously well-respected graphic designer at Pentagram in New York, said that he did not like this. He preferred the old version of the New York Times front page before they did their modification, their rationalization, whatever they call it. So I was sorry that Michael didn't like it and so on. But then a very interesting thing happened. A month or two later, Michael made another comment on this whole situation, because he had found an old copy of the Times, under the sofa or something else. And when he looked at it, the old version and the new version, which he had now been reading for several weeks, he said he understood now why the change had been made, and he thought it was the right decision. So some people have an understandable kind of knee-jerk reaction to a change of typeface. But then, after a while, they become acclimated and they find they actually like it. Whether that has happened to the devotees of Futura, who are customers of IKEA, I can't say. But, whatever these petitions were got up, they weren't successful, because the last time I looked at the IKEA catalog, it was still set in Verdana. But as I say, I had nothing whatever to do with it. I can't give you any kind of inside story. One or two journalists called me for comment when this all broke, but I had to tell them I had no idea. I had nothing to do with it, whatever. But it's funny how this issue will never die. I was giving a talk in Paris, and somebody got up, talk about something totally different. I hadn't mentioned Verdana in the whole talk. Somebody got up and said, I started a petition to get rid of Verdana in the IKEA catalog. And I said, well, I'm really sorry. But I can't get away from it.
I just want you to know I think it's one of the major crises of our day.
Oh, really? Yes. Okay. Well, yeah, you're not alone.
Okay, Matthew, we had promised people this would go for 90 minutes, which will be up in about 30 seconds. I don't want to get you all worn out where you'll say, I'm never going back there again. What I'd like to say is we can take the other questions that have been pasted into the chat window offline, and you and I can go into our secret bat cave and scheme and dream up some crazy answers, or maybe throw a dart at a dartboard and come up with some answers, and we can take the conversation offline. What do you think?
Sure. I think I'm starting to lose my voice, Jim, so this may not be a good time for me to keep on spouting. I may have to shut up at this point, and we could reconvene, just you and me, and or you could email me with some questions and so on if other interesting points have come up after we get offline. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's right. I don't want to wear out my welcome with you, because then you'll never do this again. So what I'm going to do...
I'm having to talk rather loud into my phone, so
yeah.
I'm a strain on my vocal cords.
Well, next time we'll do it better. We'll do better next time. What I'm going to do is capture the chat window. I'm going to capture the chat window into a text file, and then you and I can commiserate about some things, and we'll follow up on any further questions offline, okay?
Okay, good. All right.
Okay, I sure do want to say a big thank you, and I look forward to seeing you in D.C., and we can go see all the politicians together and wave at them.
Yes. That would be
I look
quite
forward to
fun.
seeing you there. Hopefully everybody else will see us there in D.C., and we'll have a blast, and we'll talk about fonts 24 hours a day.
Good. Okay.
All right. Thanks a bunch, Matthew, and thank you, everybody, for hanging in there with us. And God bless America. God bless everybody, and we'll see you in D.C., or maybe we'll see you at the next webinar here with John Downer on March 11. Okay, we're going to sign off now. This is Earth signing off.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.